Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the OBS BAP Training Center webinar, Communication Skills, Supporting Others and Managing Stress. I'm Blake Cush, the Director of Training and Outreach at OBS. So in the coming weeks, we know a lot of you are actually starting your transition forward and beginning to return to in-office or some in-person work. We know that transition comes with some crazy times, rather excitement challenges, a lot of questions, and we're here. So today's webinar is our sixth in the Transition Forward webinar series, which was with the goal of helping you tackle some of these unique challenges. We have one more series, and that's on next week. It's on your screen. It's Evaluating Performance. Join us. This webinar registration link is available on our website, obs.ny.gov/training, and all of the webinars, including this, is recorded, and those links are also made available on that webpage. We do provide those links and publish them on our OVS Training YouTube channel, so you can access everything there. As soon as you exit today's webinar, you'll be directed to an evaluation survey. It's research.net, which is a SurveyMonkey tool, and when you actually close out or the webinar event ends, have a warning get popped up that says, this is taking you to an external. So it is a safe link, and we really do use the feedback from these evaluations to improve. I think gotten better and better over the last 3 or 4 months just because of feedback that we've taken directly from you guys. So we appreciate it. It's like less than 5-minute survey, 10 or 11 questions, and you also have an opportunity to notify if you're interested in receiving more training or some follow-up on a variety of training topics. So today's webinar will be led by Dr. Amy Nitze, and she's the director of the Institute of Mental Health at SUNY New Paltz. Dr. Nitze is a psychologist who specializes in mental health training in academic and non-academic settings, both nationally and internationally, with an emphasis on disaster mental health and trauma recovery. She's currently collaborating with USA to develop and implement a program of mental health support for children impacted by Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. You've actually done it a couple times, is that right? To Puerto Rico? Amy is also the author of editor of numerous publications, including the recent book, Disaster Mental Health Case Studies, Lessons Learned from Council Chaos. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Nitze.
Thanks, Blake. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
So, as Blake said, just in terms of thinking about the transition back into the office and all the sort of daily pressures that transition is likely to bring for all of us. We thought what we'd do today is just spend a little time thinking about how you can navigate communication around the potential snags and problems that's all going to bring up. Some of this stuff is I'm building on principles we've talked about in other webinars. So if you've been with us in any of the other webinars, some of these same principles are going to apply. But what I'd like to do today is channel them to thinking about how do you just go about communicating in the best possible way amidst all the stress we're bringing with us from the situation outside, the stress of the changes involved in getting back to the office and being face-to-face with people again, and trying to decide, what's my goal here in this communication and what do I need? Because I think we're all going to have to figure out how to do that with each other again. So then the agenda is I'm going to go back to some stuff I've talked about in a previous webinar about the idea of responding versus reacting and staying in a place of being able to respond thoughtfully instead of being reactive to any difficult situation. And then talk about 2 different goals for communication. Are you communicating to support someone else? I think there's a lot of that's going to need to happen in terms of just people needing to vent and tell their story and get some support. Or are we communicating to solve problems around issues in the office and sort of giving you a framework for thinking about those things? So responding versus reacting. We talked a little bit, I think it was just in the previous webinar, about this idea of the red zone and the green zone in our brains, in our bodies, and trying to stay in the green zone because things go much better when you're in that place. So I want to start with this metaphor of the smoke alarm and the watchtower, which is the way that our brains work to manage stress and to manage what it perceives as threats. So we have one part of our brain that for today we'll call the emotional brain, and that's the part of our brain that acts sort of as a smoke alarm. So its job is to notice if there's a danger and alert us to that danger. So it detects a threat and it sends an alarm. And then the rational part of our brain, or the watchtower, its job is to slow down, notice it'll notice the signal, the smoke alarm going off. And then its job is to more objectively look around the environment and decide how much of a threat the potential threat is. If there's really a fire, the smoke alarm is going off because there's actually a fire, then the rational brain is going to decide, okay, we need to get the kids, get the pets, get out of the house, call 911. If the threat is actually that, the kid's got something stuck in the toaster, then there's going to be a different plan of action. And then it activates that plan. And then once we've done what we need to do to get ourselves safe, and safety is the key theme throughout this whole presentation today, then the emotional brain, or the smoke alarm, goes back off. It returns to its baseline monitoring function. So just to recap, the emotional part of our brain detects a threat and sends an alarm signal. The rational part of our brain then examines the environment, decides what the threat actually is, develops and then executes a plan of action, which allows the smoke alarm to go back off and continue monitoring. And in our daily lives, that works pretty well. Managing stress in our daily lives relies on a healthy balance between those two parts of the brain. So it's really well designed to work together to keep us safe. But in times of extreme stress or traumatic stress, and I'm lumping our current situation or situations into there because we just had so much piled on us in terms of chronic stress and then acute stress, for some of us traumatic stress. It's as if the smoke alarm can get stuck in the on position. And that's really distracting, right? When your smoke alarm in your house is stuck on, that is a really, you can't find it or you can't get the battery out of it. That's so overwhelming, and you can't really do much else until you stop and get the alarm shut back off. And so when that happens in our brain, the brain gets out of balance. And so the rational part of our brain, the part that does the things that we need to do, or has the skills that we need in order to get through our day at work. These are things like memory, concentration, being able to set a plan of action and then execute that plan of action. Those functions of our brain get disrupted when the smoke alarm is going off. And so not only can we not do our jobs well, but we've got this sort of distracting, crazy noise going off in our brain, metaphorically speaking. And so all of our attention gets focused on just trying to get the smoke alarm to stop making that terrible noise, and we're not able to do the things we need to do to get through our day. And so a definition of resilience, which I've used before, is being able to stay in or quickly return to that place of balance after we get disrupted. So when the smoke alarm gets stuck on, when we're triggered by a threat from the outside, any sort of danger or stress from the outside, are we able to, and then the brain gets out of balance, and the rational part of our brain gets thrown off or goes offline, and the emotional part of our brain takes over. How quickly are we able to get back into balance? And so when we're in balance, we're able to respond thoughtfully to a situation. When we're not, we become much more reactive. And that reactive place, usually we're acting in terms of survival, and we're not making good, thoughtful decisions that include the rational part of our brain. So we're going to call, my green zone doesn't look very green. I thought I put that in green font. But responding is being in the green zone. So that's the place where the emotional and rational part of our brain are in balance, and our body's in its resting state, and it's acting from a sense of perceived safety. That's a very different way to go about responding to a situation than when we're in the red zone. And that's when we're in that fight or flight mode. That's when the alarm in our brain is in the on position. That is not a place our body being able to being in a resting place or being in a place of restoring itself. It really disturbs all the, when we're in that place, the hormones that are circulating really are disrupting all the other systems in our body. So it's not just our brain that's disrupted. It's our entire physiological system. And when we're in that place, we're acting from a sense of perceived deficit or disturbance or lack of safety. And again, trying to communicate with each other in the office or solve problems, figure out what we need to do next at the office, all of those things just become so much harder when we're in that red zone place. So I want you to keep that frame in mind. So the goal sort of today is how do you, when you're communicating and interacting now as you all transition forward, how can you do your best to communicate about whatever you need to communicate about in a way that keeps you in the green zone and keeps the other people that you're communicating with in the green zone, which is going to make everything go much more smoothly. But I want to talk about two different goals in terms of communicating. And again, that's supporting others and then solving problems. And so the first suggestion or the first point I want to make is figuring out what your goal in a situation is. When somebody comes to you and they're upset, if a supervisee or a client comes to you and they're upset, what is it that is your goal in that moment? Is it to listen and support them, or is there a problem that we're solving? And sometimes people need one, sometimes they need the other. A lot of the time they need both, and that's when it gets sort of confusing and messages can get mixed up. But I want to start by just communicating when the goal is simply to support someone else, when what they need from you is really a listening ear, okay? So when people are in that place, when people are struggling, often what they need is the opportunity to express themselves and then to feel heard and understood when they express themselves, and then to feel validated, to feel like someone has acknowledged and honored the way that they're feeling and given them permission to have those feelings or their experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings. But there's a lot of things that are not on this list, things that people actually don't need, that can actually be a little bit harmful when they're struggling. And if I was teaching class right now and you were all in front of me, I would ask you to tell me what you think is missing from this list. But I will go on. People don't usually benefit from having their experiences compared to the experiences of others, having their experiences minimized or dismissed. And we often unintentionally do this to each other, even when we don't mean to. Nobody goes into a situation well, most of the time, we don't go into a situation intending to be dismissive of someone's concerns or minimizing them. But the way that we go about trying to help often comes off that way. People don't usually benefit from being encouraged to stop feeling what they're feeling. We do that to each other a lot too. And it's simply not that simple. If people could do that, they would. And often they don't benefit from advice or having their problem fixed for them. And that's where this gets tricky because in an office setting, fixing a problem or giving somebody advice might be the natural instinct, right? So again, just being really clear on what it is you're trying to do when you're communicating with people. But in terms of listening and having people feel heard and understood and validated, really what we're talking about there is empathy. And empathy is it's feeling what someone else is feeling from within their frame of reference, putting yourself in their shoes, emotionally speaking, and then communicating back to them that you understand that you really are able to understand what they're feeling. Sympathy, on the other hand, is feeling sorry for someone or feeling compassion, but not from a place of being in the other person's shoes. And so people really benefit from empathy where sympathy can actually kind of get in the way. And so I have this little video. Maybe some of you, it's not my video. I'm going to show you a little video. Maybe some of you have seen it. This is Brené Brown talking about the definition of empathy and sympathy and how one is much more helpful than the other. So let's hope that this works.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then you look and you say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us. It's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to do right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. So I think empathy is not a new idea to most of you that are, working directly with clients. But in times when we're all stressed and we're all, this whole transition back, or transition forward, I guess, we're all probably teetering on the red zone a lot of the time. And so how do you keep yourself in the green zone enough to really be present and notice and be able to be empathic with someone else? It's just, there's a lot, right? And so I think just a refresher or a reminder about the importance of this and what you need to do for yourself to stay in the green zone so that you can be there for other people is it's really important, and I think it's a challenge that we're all facing. So to be empathic is one thing, but then to demonstrate that to the other person involves reflecting back to them the experience that you hear them sharing. I should say the experience or the thoughts or the feelings, right? And so it's acting as a mirror. And so a lot of times in day-to-day conversation and conversations with peers, as opposed to conversations with clients, we tend to not talk this way. So just as a reminder, there are some, these are just some sentence stems that you can use to deliver empathy, or to communicate empathy. So you could say something like, so you're saying you're really overwhelmed, or you're really worried about, what going back to school is going to be like for your kids. Or it sounds like you're really just sad right now and missing the person that you lost. Or let me see if I have this right. And then you communicate back what you heard them say. And an important reminder here is that it's okay to get it wrong. If you get the feeling wrong, if I say, gosh, Blake, it sounds like you're really feeling sad. And Blake says, actually, Amy, I'm not sad. I'm just really pissed off. Great. Now we both have had a chance to clarify that. He's had a chance to clarify for himself and for me. And he's also heard me make the attempt. And so sometimes I think people freeze up when they're intentionally trying to reflect feelings because they're worried they're going to get it wrong, and it's just not it's not that big of a deal if you get it wrong. Sometimes it can actually be helpful.
I'm not mad at you, Amy.
Now I can get through my day much better. Thank you, Blake. So here's some things to avoid. If you've been in a training with us before, you've probably seen a version of this slide, but try to avoid saying things like don't feel bad or don't cry. If that worked, if saying don't feel bad would allow somebody to stop feeling bad, the world would be a much easier place to navigate. But it just doesn't work that way. And sometimes it can make people feel worse because now they feel like they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling on top of having the bad feeling. Try not to think about it, or let's talk about something else. Those are changing the subject, and that's almost always to the benefit of the person listening. Because if I'm listening to Blake tell his story, I don't know what to say, so I'm just going to change the subject. Or his story is painful and it's really hard for me to sit with, so I'd rather talk about something else. And the person across from you will notice that you really, they'll get the message that you don't want to or can't handle what they're feeling. Saying I know how you feel, you might, but it's better to demonstrate that by using an empathy statement. So I can say, Blake, it sounds like you're really feeling pissed off, versus, Josh, Blake, I know how you feel, right? And often the thing that I know how you feel thing does is it changes the conversation now to being about me. So now I might say, oh, Blake, I know how you feel. Let me tell you about this time when I was pissed off. And so that now changes the dynamic. And now I've switched from just being a listening and supportive to like now asking the person in front of me to listen and support me. The piece about it's God's will is a slippery slope unless you are sort of ordained in some way to make that pronouncement from within some religious frame of reference, and the person in front of you also subscribes to that same frame of reference. Otherwise, that's not likely to be helpful. And then I think the video did a good job of demonstrating why sentences that start with at least aren't helpful. They just really, if you're about to start with at least, whatever comes after that is going to feel dismissive and it's going to feel minimizing of the person. And our attempt there is always good, right? It's to help the person look on the bright side. Most likely, if they're expressing distress to you, they're not ready for that. They're not ready for that looking on the bright side piece and sitting with where they are instead of trying to change, sitting the frame of reference or the place that they're at, sitting with that versus trying to change it is what's important. Okay? And often, some questions are just unanswerable. There's a lot of, in the current situation, there's a lot of, why is this happening, or why me, or why not me, or all kinds of sort of existential questions. And those questions often don't have answers. And it's okay to not know what to say. It's okay to not have the right answer. Just being with the person while they wrestle with the question is what's important. And I think the video did a nice job of highlighting that as well. People just want you to be by their side while they struggle, not necessarily to fix it. If that's your goal, right? But you can also, in the office setting now, if we all just, I would love this, to get paid to just sit around and listen to people all day, but we also have work to get done. And so how do you navigate between when am I listening and communicating for support, and when do we need to sort of get down to business? I was trying to think of where I got this quote. It's something that circulates in my head. I think it was a member of my dissertation committee. But he used to say, behavior change by itself is unacceptable to people in distress. So when we're all in this place of distress, when we're all sort of teetering on the verge of the red zone, a lot of the time, moving too quickly to solving problems without the empathy and the joining and the connection can really be a problem. So that's what I mean by behavior change. Getting down to the let's do something, let's do something different. What do we need to do? It's important, but if you jump too soon and you skip over the step of validating or joining, you're probably going to run into some problems. And so there's a book by Rick Hansen called Resilient that I've been really sort of reading and absorbing as we've been going through this experience. And he talks about the difference between when you're communicating about sharing experiences and solving problems. And sharing experiences are the sort of, how is this landing for me? What's going on for me? And so those are sentences to start with. For an example, I feel bad when X happens. Versus solving problems is when we move to the what should we do about it? And so really thinking about, as you're communicating with someone, which of these things are we doing right now? They're both important, but sometimes it can get really messy if one of you, I'm sure you've all had this experience where you're talking and what you're wanting is somebody to validate what you're saying, and instead they move immediately to problem solving, or vice versa. You're really wanting to get something done and the other person just wants to sit around and talk about their feelings, right? So I think in the current context, as we all go back, it's going to be really tricky to think through this. So both the sharing experiences and the solving problems are necessary, and we often weave them together. But the problem talk, the problem communicating for problem solving can easily slide into arguments. And again, the goal here is that whatever you're doing, the problem that you're working to solve, that you're doing that as best you can from a place where you're in balance and in a green zone place and are able to respond instead of react. And also that the person in front of you can stay in the green zone as much as possible, and that you can respond together. If one of you is responding and one of you is reacting, that tends to be a mess. And so that is all about safety. So our brains can get back into balance, right? The alarm in our brain can go back off when we have an experience of safety. And so really what I want to emphasize as an overall theme for today is, what can you do to keep both yourself and the person in front of you? And I'm fully aware that you're not in control of the person in front of you, and you're not in control of or responsible for their feelings. But you can set a stage where people feel safe enough that they can stay in that green zone place, or quickly get back to that green zone place. And that can be with just moments of safety that allow us to take a deep breath, sort of quickly get back into balance, get back into the green zone enough to get through the current conversation. And so the experience talk, the sharing of experiences, tends to be safer. Problem talk can more quickly trigger people, and then people can more easily get triggered into a red zone, feeling a threat, feeling attacked or feeling misunderstood. And when people don't feel safe, now we're in that cascade of red zone to people just being reactive. So my recommendation here is that if you have moved to the problem talk, if you've moved to the behavior change or the what are we going to do about it, and it gets tense and you notice that the person in front of you is getting triggered in some way, or you feel yourself getting triggered, switch back to the experience talk for a little while. Switch back to talking about how the problem is landing for you or how you're feeling. And then you can move back to the problem talk once people feel safe again. And so go back. So essentially what I'm saying is go back to joining. Go back to a relational conversation, and then you can switch back to the problem-focused conversation when you both are back to the green zone, at least temporarily. And so in terms of safety, I want to make 2 points here. One is entering the dialogue safely and then staying in the dialogue safely. So entering the dialogue safely, entering the dialogue safely is about establishing a mutual purpose. The person in front of you needs to trust your motives and to believe that you are in the dialogue in order to, that you understand and care about their side of the story or about their goals. So before you enter a conversation like this, thinking about what do I want for myself, what do I want for the person in front of me, and what do I want for this relationship, and really being clear about that. And then checking yourself to see, does the person in front of me believe that I care about their goals in this conversation? Do they trust me? Do they trust my motives? Super important. And it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, when everybody's stressed and overwhelmed and there's so many things to think about personally and professionally, I think this might quickly get lost. And so slowing down, thinking ahead of time, and what can you do when you're entering a dialogue, that's a conversation that might be difficult around a problem, or when you have to give some hard feedback. If there's going to be a problem involved or some hard feedback involved, people are going to more quickly get into that red zone feeling of feeling defensive. And so entering the conversation with a sense of mutual purpose can at least start the conversation off with both of you in the green zone, right? And so either recognizing the mutual purpose that you both have in the conversation, or coming up with one, right? If the conversation is one you need to have, what can you do to get the other person to buy in and see the benefit for them as well? I hope this makes sense. So entering the dialogue safely is about establishing mutual purpose, but remaining in the dialogue safely is about respect. And that, again, should feel and seem pretty obvious, but in all the chaos, I think this is something that's going to get lost. And so, do others believe that you respect them? And respect is like the air that we breathe. As long as it's there, we're not thinking about it at all. But the minute it gets lost, or people feel a threat to it, it's all they're going to be able to think about. And whatever else you're trying to accomplish, if somebody feels disrespected, all they're going to be doing is protecting themselves and protecting their dignity, and anything else that you say is going to get lost. And so be watching for signs that people are getting into that red zone. When emotions start to escalate, when the person in front of you starts to get heightened emotionally, that's a sign that they maybe don't feel respected, or in some other way, they're not feeling safe. And we've talked before about mirror neurons in the brain and how we're wired to mirror the emotions of the person in front of us. And so if you're having this conversation and you come into it calmly, you've planned out what you need to say, you've done your best to establish a sense of safety, but then for whatever reason, the other person starts to get escalated, starts to perceive a lack of safety and then get into that red zone. It's possible, if you're not really centered and aware of what's happening, you get escalated and become hooked, and you get into the red zone as well. Now, nothing good is going to happen. And so instead of getting hooked and fighting back, what can you do to stay calm? What can you do to stay in the green zone? And then if you can stay calm and stay in the green zone when the other person starts to feel escalated and threatened and get into the red zone, it's much more likely that they're going to de-escalate as well. But in order to do that, you may have to step out of the content of the conversation and rebuild safety before you re-engage with the content. So if you notice things are starting to get heated, if you notice that there's an escalation of emotions and that your points aren't landing with the other person, there's probably a lack of safety. Step out of the content and go back to that experience or relation-focused part of the conversation where you're talking about how you're feeling, and try to rejoin around each person's own personal experience and then re-engage around the content. That may not be for some people, they may need some time to calm down, and so that re-engagement may not happen in the same conversation. You may need to agree to both go back and take some time out from the conversation and then revisit it after you both had a chance to think through what it is that you need or what you want out of that conversation. And I wanted to specifically talk about anger. When people are experiencing distress, like to some extent, I think we all are right now, they're going to target that, and that gets expressed as anger. They're going to target that at a lot of different outlets, and some of those might be rational and some of those might be irrational. And just by you being in front of them, when they're feeling angry, it may get channeled to you. We've all been in, I'm sure we've all had this experience. They may also be mad at you because you're the person in authority, or because they perceive that they've been slighted by the system and they see that you are part of the system, right? I know you've all had these experiences. So do your best. I know this is ridiculous, but I'll talk more about it in a second. Do your best not to take it personally, and to just stay in that place of listening and validating. Often people just need to get that piece off their chest before they can move on to the next thing. So validating their feelings, going back to empathy, without getting defensive or angry, can go a long way. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. So I've talked about that high emotionality is contagious, and for you to try not to get hooked. That's the first thing. The second thing, again, is to remember to consider anger as a sign of a lack of safety. So as soon as you see that anger, is there something that you can do to help the person get back into the green zone? And often, again, that goes to shifting back to a relational conversation instead of a threat conversation. Instead of a problem-focused conversation. And then the other thing that I wanted to really talk about here, which I do when we train counselors, is talk about anger as a surface level emotion. And so often underneath anger is fear or sadness. I don't know if you guys are noticing I don't know if you guys have seen this movie, but in some late night burst of what I thought was creativity, this is the character Anger from the movie Inside Out. And then these are fear and sadness. So anger, people lead with anger, but what's underneath the anger is usually something much softer, like fear or sadness. And fear and sadness are, for me, and I think for a lot of us that go into the helping profession, it's much easier to connect with and empathize with someone's fear or someone's sadness than it is to connect with their anger. And so can you try to, when people are angry, can you try to connect with and empathize with the emotion underneath the anger? And that will soften people quicker than just about any other strategy. And if you can connect with that, they might also more quickly be able to connect with that as well. Again, I'm saying all this like it's just a formula that you can use, and I'm fully aware that it's not at all. But I wanted, at least when this is out there and you're thinking about these things, if you know that's the goal, you can do your best to work with it. A few other general communication tips around navigating all of this stuff as you transition forward. Often misunderstandings can come when you agree on something, but you and the other person have different understandings of what that agreement was. So if you're trying to agree on something, make sure that you operationalize that agreement so that the terms you're using, the terms you're agreeing on are specific and concrete, and that you both understand what that looks like. So if you, this is just a little example, but if you say, we both agree we're going to get here early, or we're going to try to get to work early this first week back so that we can all have some time to just enjoy each other's company. what does early mean, right? And early to me means I'll get there 3 minutes ahead of time, where people that are more on their game, like Blake and Rachel, for them, that might mean 15 or 20 minutes early. And so if they get there 15 or 20 minutes early, and I think I'm getting there early I'm only getting there 3 minutes ahead, by the time I get there, they might already be annoyed with me. And now we're starting off in a bad place. So making sure that if you're making any kind of agreement like that, how specific and concrete can you be? And the more, the better. And make sure that you both understand what that actually looks like. This is advice or tips that you've probably heard a million times, but I think it bears repeating in the current context. Avoid leading your sentences with the word you. That is almost a guarantee that you're going to trip someone into the red zone pretty quickly. Start as best you can with I statements every time. Those are statements that talk about your own experience, and it's much less likely that someone's going to perceive an I statement as a threat than they are going to perceive a you statement as a threat. And again, when you're tense and stuff, even if you have the best of intentions, when you're tense, you're much more likely to default to some of the stuff that isn't as productive. Another one that you've probably also heard before is avoid using the word but. So if you use the word but in a sentence, you've almost by definition invalidated what you said before that. So you're really doing a good job, but then they're only going to hear what you say after the but. Sometimes you have to communicate conflicting messages or messages where there's some sort of dialectic. So I just about mentioned, but try using and at the same time instead of but. So yes, you are doing a really good job. And at the same time, there are some things I'd like you to be working on. You're communicating the very same message, but the and at the same time is more of an opportunity to hold that both things can be true than if you say this, but this, in which case the second thing is what people hear. And then the last one that I have here on this is avoid as much as you can asking why questions. There's something about why questions that tend to feel threatening to people. Why did you do it that way? Why did you make that choice? Often it's not intended. You're really wanting to understand what someone was thinking. But they might not know, first of all. They might not know why they did it. And so asking a why question can be threatening because people don't have a good explanation. They may be confused themselves about why something happened. But there's also just something about that word that can be triggering, and people can more easily start feeling defensive, and defensive is a sign of lack of safety. Now we're back to the red zone before you ever even have a chance to talk about what you wanted to talk about. And so try using the word what instead of the word why. There's just something about it that's less threatening. So you could, instead of saying, why did you do that? You might say something like, help me understand what was going on when you made that choice. You're pretty much asking the same thing, but you're doing it in a way that's less likely to get them into the red zone. I'm a little bit ahead of time today. And finally, remember that staying empathically engaged, especially now as we're transitioning forward, is going to require of you that you take care of yourself. In terms of being with other people relationally, only genuine empathy is helpful, and people really quickly sense when you're not being genuine. And then everything you do after that probably isn't going to land or be as effective as you intended it to be. But remaining genuine with many stressed out clients or staff or colleagues is just going to require you to have your own tank full. You can't give what you don't have. And so as we think about moving forward, it's in some ways it's a good opportunity. I know for myself and for my office, we're thinking about what do we need to do to reset now, and what can we do to go a little more slowly, be a little more deliberate, pace ourselves in a way that allows us to have some time for self-care. I know at least one member of my team is on this call right now. She's probably, hopefully, feeling good about the fact that that's what's on my mind. This is a real, in that way, again, this is a real opportunity to think about how can I have a different routine than the one that I had when we left the office in March, and one that's a little bit more healthy for me and for the people around me. And then know your limits. I think those of us in the helping professions are pretty bad about that. But when you've had enough and you need to tap out, please do so, because not tapping out when you need to is ultimately harmful for you, and you're going to get into that red zone place. The person in front of you is going to get into that red zone place, and then it's not good for anybody in the office, and it's ultimately not good for the people that you serve. So with a little bit of time to go, that is the presentation that I had for you today. I saw that there were some things coming up in the chat, but I wasn't really able to process them. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, we definitely have some questions. You ready to roll with some Q&A?
Just give me a second to try to stop sharing so that I can see you guys better.
Okay. So if you do have some questions, keep sharing them in our chat box. There's quite a few, and we'll go through them right now. We do have, 12 more hours up. If you do need to jump out too, that's okay. We thank you for joining us, and join us next week. We got another webinar scheduled then. Also, if you happen to leave, please do your evaluations. Otherwise, I'm hoping we can have a good discussion here. I know we had a question earlier, and Rachel, Rebecca, if you guys are still on, if I miss questions or if I skip one because it's scrolling, just jump in and feel free to add to it. Somebody earlier asked, how would you support employees that are so empathetic with clients such that they are likely experiencing vicarious trauma?
Happens all the time, right? I think, first of all, making them aware that that's a possibility. And when I went through school and through my training, no one ever talked to me about that. I thought that's sort of what we were supposed to be doing, right? And helping them identify that in a conversation, helping them identify when it's too much. When you're giving that kind of feedback, be talking about the observations that you have that have allowed you to notice that in the other person. What is it that you're noticing that's causing you to think that the person is experiencing that? There's a tool. It's called the Professional Quality of Life Measure. Rebecca, can you help me remember to share this with them? Or maybe, I don't know if you have access to it now, you can put it in the chat. But there's a tool that measures vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, which is, I think, also probably pretty common right now. And so it also measures compassion satisfaction, so the good parts of doing the work that we do. And so incorporating an instrument like that can be really useful if you have, oh, look at that, she's good. So there's a link to that instrument in the chat now. So if the person isn't getting it and they're not able to understand it, which I think is a hard thing to understand the first few times you experience it personally, then using an instrument like that can also be helpful. And this is a time when it's okay to share your own story. When was the time when you figured out that vicarious trauma was impacting you, and how bad did it get before you realized it? I think in this context, you sharing your story might be super helpful.
Somebody asked us, what are your thoughts on problem-solving talk versus solution-focused talk? Is there a difference?
Yeah. So solution-focused talk, I think what you're referring to there is when you're just focused on getting to a solution versus hashing out the problem. And it always feels better to be working toward a solution. And I think that's what I was talking about with the sort of mutual purpose, right? If you both go into the conversation, if you're able to open the conversation with identifying a purpose for the conversation or your intended outcome for the conversation, in a way that the other person buys into, what's in it for them, and then be working toward that mutual solution the whole time, you're much more likely to get there than if you just have a problem and you with the other person and you're trying to get them to buy into your way of seeing it, or getting them to agree that the problem is as you see the problem to be. I hope that makes sense. That you can sort of come up with a mutual definition of the problem and then a mutual solution to that problem. But again, I want to just make the point, go back to that quote that I had up there about behavior change by itself being unacceptable to people in distress. And so whatever you need to do to listen and validate and join and make sure that the person feels heard before jumping into problem or solution talk is also really important.
Somebody also asked, I think this was in reference to when we were talking about anger reactions. How do we respond politely to the reactions, especially in a tense situation?
Can you repeat? You're jumping in. I heard the question. How do you react to what? Tense situations? Is that what you said? Yeah.
How can we respond politely to reactions, especially in a tense situation?
Yeah. I would start with a reflection, a validation. You know, I'm noticing that you're pretty upset right now, or I'm noticing that the situation. You know what? Those are two different things. Hold on for a second. You can start with a reflection, right? An empathy statement. So it sounds like you're really feeling overwhelmed. That's an empathy statement. You could also start with what in the counseling world we would call like a process comment or a process observation, where you step out of the content and just make a comment on the process. So you could say something like, sorry that I'm picking on you today, Blake, but you could say something like, Blake, I'm noticing that, you know, as we talk about this, the situation has gotten really tense, and I'm wondering what we might be able to do about that right now. Or I'm wondering if we might need to both take 5 minutes and go get a cup of coffee and then rejoin the conversation. So where you just sort of, when people are overwhelmed by the content, step out of the content. And you can do that by reflecting feelings, or you can talk about that by making a process observation. Like, I'm noticing that that the tension in the room is escalating. It's making me feel uncomfortable. I'm wondering if it's making you feel uncomfortable. I'm wondering what we can do about it. Something like that.
That's a great answer. So somebody, this is a longer question, so I'm going to paraphrase, but they're asking how to respond or deal with a person who repeats complaints and dwells on their same life circumstances. So someone who continues to bring up the trauma time and time again.
Excuse me for just 1 second. Can you guys try to stay in or out? That's okay. Sorry. Oh, now I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Oh, when someone is stuck on
the chronic repeater of trauma. Yeah.
That. Then I think maybe trying to move to solutions. If people are stuck in the feeling, what can you do to help move them to the solution? So, you know, you could say something like, still always start with a reflection. Like, I hear you're feeling really, whatever the feeling is. And I remember that we've talked about this before, that you've had this for quite a while. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what we might do to help you move on, or what we might do to help get you, past this or something like that. So when people are stuck in one place, whether it's the problem talk or the feeling talk, if they're stuck in one or the other, what can you do to sort of balance it out and move them to that other place? So if they're stuck in the complaining, acknowledge and then redirect toward a solution. If people can't do that, if you try to redirect them toward a solution and they're just not there, then one, I think, reasonable hypothesis is that what they're complaining about isn't what they're really upset about, right? If they've been talking to you about the same problem over and over, you validate, you try to problem solve, and nothing works, then the presenting problem, the thing that they're leading with, may not be the thing that's actually bothering them. And then probing a little further to say, I'm wondering if there's something else going on, or checking in with them in a different way to see if you can get out what's underneath the presenting problem might also be helpful.
So a lot of, by the way, you're amazing and awesome. And we have some people who want to join your book club if you have one.
Oh, let's have a book club. That's fun. Okay. Oh, about the resilient book. All right, I'm in.
Yeah. Some other resources. People asking about slides. Yes, we will share slides, the video recording, as well as the links that we were shared in the chat, including the tool, the Brené Brown video. Those will all get posted in the web or in the YouTube for this training. We only have time for a few more questions. So somebody asked, what is some advice for retaining empathy in a conversation where we're forced to confront someone about poor behavior as opposed to poor performance?
To confront poor behavior as opposed to, I didn't hear the last
poor
part.
Performance.
I'm going to need you to, I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah,
Can you restate that?
So advice for retaining empathy in a conversation where you're forced to confront someone about their poor behavior versus poor performance.
I'm not sure I understand the difference between that the person is trying to draw between poor behavior and poor performance. But when I have to give hard feedback to someone, which I'm not very good at, I'm going to be honest, I try to stay empathic with what the person underneath the behavior, right? Or at least to what it must be like to be hearing this, right now. And a lot of times people, as a therapist, I try to remember people got the way they are for some good reason. And people are usually doing the best they can. And people are usually leading with the behavior that they have been taught, that has been reinforced for them in the past. So if whatever they're doing isn't working behaviorally for you, or isn't working behaviorally in the office, there's probably still some reason why they feel like that behavior is the behavior that they need to be displaying. It's like, here's an example, but a lot of times if I'm training counselors or therapists, they'll say that their client is being manipulative. And my definition of manipulative is people who have tried to get their needs met directly, and that hasn't worked for them in the past. And so they've developed or learned to try to get their needs met in indirect ways. And to the person they're doing that with, it often feels manipulative, but it's a learned behavior on their part. And so I guess that's the frame I want to offer, is like, what might it be that person is trying to accomplish with that behavior? And how can you help them get that need met in a more direct way?
That was a great attempt at responding. So we'll make this our last one. And somebody's asking us, so timely given COVID-19, but how do you respond to an employee who continuously speaks of COVID-19 and you want to be empathetic at the same time you have to be able to make the employee realize he or she is overwhelmed and may need professional?
Yeah. It depends if you think, okay, it's one thing if you think they need therapy, but if it's like they're just doing this talk and they're stuck, focused on the problem, in that case, I might teach them some of what we just talked about, it seems like you're always in this state of distress and it's really hard. I know it's hard to function and it's hard on you when we're in that state of distress. So what are some, start with what are some self-care things that they can do to help themselves feel calmer so that they're not always in that state of distress or in that red zone. I really like this, in case you haven't noticed, I really like this red zone, green zone stuff because I think it's really easy for people to understand. And I can easily, for myself, feel when I'm in the red zone, and it's easily identifiable. So a little bit of almost psychoeducation around that, and encouraging them to do some things to self-regulate or self-soothe or self-care. But if it's to the point that the self-care piece isn't working and you do think they need, that they may benefit from professional help, First of all, always lead with an empathy statement. Always lead with a validation of what they're experiencing before you suggest something like that. And then just say, you know, sometimes I might do it something like, sometimes when people are feeling like you're feeling, they benefit from, you know, talking to a professional. So it's not saying, Blake, you, my friend, need some help. But sometimes, Blake, I've noticed that when people are experiencing the level of distress that you're experiencing, they benefit from some additional help. Something like that. Have you thought about that? Is that something that you've tried? Let's work together to find some, you know, to find some names, something like that.
Right. Well, I think that's a perfect thing to end on today. Thank you for another awesome, amazing presentation. We'll put together all these resources and slides. We'll get shared with you guys. It probably takes about a day or two for us to get it downloaded and published on our YouTube channel. You'll also get an email about it as well. But we really want to thank you all for joining us today. Amy, Rebecca, the whole IDMH team, thank you for another amazing job.
Thanks, everyone. Let us know when we're going to start book club, Blake.
Yes, we'll organize it.
All right.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.